Military satellites have just confirmed a massive mobilization across the northern frontier, forces moving south, equipment staging at forward positions, naval assets repositioning in the eastern Mediterranean, and a coalition is forming that world leaders feared would never materialize. Russia, Turkey, Iran, three nations with centuries of rivalry, three powers with conflicting interests, three governments that should never be able to cooperate, and yet they are cooperating. Right now, in real time, in ways that mirror an ancient prophecy with chilling precision. 2,500 years ago, a Jewish exile named Ezekiel stood on the banks of the Chebar River in Babylon and received a vision of a massive coalition from the north, an alliance of specific nations, moving against the mountains of Israel. For centuries, scholars read that prophecy and debated its meaning. Was it symbolic? Was it historical? Had it already been fulfilled? Those debates are over, because in 2026, the Ezekiel alliance is no longer a theological discussion. It is a geopolitical reality. The nations are named, the coalition is forming, the direction is clear, and the target is the Holy Land. What you're about to discover will change how you see every headline coming out of the Middle East today. Because this isn't random diplomacy. This isn't ordinary power politics. This is ancient destiny activating before our eyes. Let's begin where every serious investigation must begin, with the source material. Because what Ezekiel wrote down 2,500 years ago is so specific, so geographically precise, and so militarily detailed that it reads less like ancient prophecy and more like a modern intelligence briefing. Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. These two chapters contain one of the most detailed prophetic battle plans in all of Scripture. They describe a massive military invasion of Israel by a coalition of nations, led by a figure from the far north. Ezekiel 38, 1-6. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and lead you out, with all your army, horses, and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all its troops, the house of Togarmah from the far north and all its troops, many peoples with you. Read that passage carefully, because every name in that list corresponds to a modern nation, and every modern nation on that list is currently aligning against Israel. Let's decode them one by one. Gog is described as a leader, not a nation. He is the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. The Hebrew word translated chief is Rosh. Many scholars, particularly those working from the Septuagint, translate this as a proper noun. Rosh, the ancient name from which Russia derives its modern identity. The debate over this translation has continued for centuries. But consider the geographic description. In Ezekiel 38:15, you will come from your place in the far north. Ezekiel 39:2, I will turn you around and drag you along. I will bring you from the far north. Far north. Take a globe. Place your finger on Jerusalem. Draw a line directly north, as far north as you can go while staying on a major landmass. Where do you end up? Moscow. Russia sits directly north of Israel on the same longitudinal axis. No other major world power occupies that position. The far north, Russia. The connection is geographic, not speculative. Meshech and Tubal. These names appear in Genesis 10 as sons of Japheth. Their descendants settled in what is now modern Turkey. Ancient Meshech corresponds to the region around modern Ankara. Ancient Tubal corresponds to central and eastern Turkey. Turkey, NATO member, increasingly hostile toward Israel. Increasingly aligned with Russia and Iran. Persia. This one requires no interpretation. Persia is Iran. The name was officially changed to Iran in 1935. But the biblical text uses the ancient name that every reader, ancient or modern, can trace directly to the same geographic territory. Iran, the Islamic Republic, openly dedicated to the destruction of Israel, currently operating proxy forces on Israel's northern and southern borders. Ethiopia. The Hebrew word is Cush. Ancient Cush covered territory south of Egypt, including modern Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia. The region known today as the Horn of Africa. Sudan has already aligned with Iran and Russia through military cooperation agreements. Eritrea has Russian military facilities. The Horn of Africa is increasingly under the influence of Eastern powers. Libya. And the Hebrew word is Put. Ancient Put occupied the territory of modern Libya and possibly extended into Algeria and Tunisia. North Africa, west of Egypt. Libya has been in political chaos since 2011. Russian Wagner Group forces operated extensively in the country. Turkish military forces established bases there. The vacuum of power has allowed both Russia and Turkey to expand influence across North African territory. Gomer. Genesis 10 identifies Gomer as a son of Japheth, whose descendants settled in what is now central Turkey, and possibly into parts of Eastern Europe. Some scholars associate Gomer with the ancient Cimmerians, who occupied territory along the Black Sea coast. Again, the geographic connection points to Turkey and its surrounding region. Togarmah. Our Ezekiel specifies the house of Togarmah from the far north. Ancient Togarmah is associated with Armenia, eastern Turkey, and the Caucasus region, territory that sits between Russia, Turkey, and Iran, the border region where all three powers converge. Now step back and look at the complete list. Russia, Turkey, Iran, Sudan, Libya, Armenia, and the Caucasus, a coalition of nations from the north and east of Israel, led by a figure from the far north, moving against the mountains of Israel. Now look at the headlines from 2026. Russia, Turkey, and Iran are cooperating at levels never seen before. Military coordination is increasing across all three nations. Sudan has deepened its ties with Moscow and Tehran. Libya remains a contested territory with Russian and Turkish forces present. The Caucasus region is under increasing Russian influence after the 2023 Nagorno-Karabakh situation eliminated Armenian autonomy. Every nation on Ezekiel's list is moving in exactly the direction the prophecy describes. Coincidence or fulfillment? Let me show you just how deep this alignment goes. Section 2. The Rise of the Northern Command. What I'm about to lay out for you is documented, sourced from public intelligence reports, military briefings, and diplomatic records. This is not speculation. Over the past 36 months, Russia, Turkey, and Iran have formalized military cooperation at a pace that has alarmed Western intelligence agencies. Let's start with Russia and Iran. In January 2025, Moscow and Tehran signed what analysts are calling the most comprehensive military cooperation agreement in the history of both nations. This agreement goes far beyond the arms deals and advisory roles that characterized their relationship during the Syrian civil war. The 2025 agreement includes joint weapons development, shared intelligence infrastructure, coordinated naval operations in the Caspian Sea and Indian Ocean, and mutual defense provisions that approach the level of a formal military alliance. Iran has been supplying Russia with Shahed drones for use in the Ukraine conflict since 2022, but the flow has reversed. Russia is now providing Iran with advanced air defense systems, satellite reconnaissance capabilities, and naval warfare technology. Su-35 fighter jets have been delivered to Iran. These 400 air defense systems are being installed across Iranian territory. Russian military advisors are embedded with Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps units. And here's the detail that connects directly to Ezekiel's prophecy. Russian military forces are not just cooperating with Iran remotely. They are physically present in territories that border Israel. Russia maintains its largest overseas military base at Hamaymim in Syria, located in Latakia province, approximately 200 miles from the Israeli border. Russian S-300 and S-400 air defense systems are operational across Syrian territory. Russian naval vessels operate from Tartus port on the Mediterranean coast. And in 2025, Russia expanded its military footprint in Syria significantly. Additional ground forces, enhanced electronic warfare capabilities, 2 extended runway facilities capable of handling strategic bombers. Russia is not withdrawing from the region surrounding Israel. It is digging in. Now let's look at Turkey. Turkey's relationship with Israel has collapsed to its lowest point in modern history. In 2024, President Erdogan publicly declared that Turkey would consider military intervention on behalf of Palestinian interests. While this was widely dismissed as rhetoric, the military preparations that followed were not rhetorical. Turkey has expanded its naval presence in the eastern Mediterranean. New bases in northern Cyprus have been upgraded. Landing craft and amphibious assault vessels have been repositioned. Turkish military exercises in 2025 included scenarios explicitly designed for operations in the Levant, the eastern Mediterranean, and the same waters that separate Turkey from the coast of Israel. And Turkey's relationship with Russia has deepened despite Turkey's NATO membership. Joint energy projects, shared military technology, coordinated positions on Middle Eastern policy. The purchase of Russian S-400 air defense systems by Turkey in 2019 was the first crack. By 2026, the crack has become a chasm. Turkey increasingly operates as a partner of Russia and Iran, rather than as a Western ally. The Astana process, originally designed to manage the Syrian conflict, has evolved into a broader strategic framework linking Moscow, Tehran, and Ankara on regional security issues. 3 capitals, 3 militaries, 1 direction, south, toward Israel. Ezekiel 38:15. You will come from your place in the far north, you and many nations with you. All of them riding on horses, a great company and a mighty army. Now here's what most people miss about this verse. The phrase riding on horses doesn't necessarily mean literal horses. The Hebrew word sus can refer to horses, but in prophetic language, it often represents military transport, speed, mobility. Cavalry in the ancient sense means mobile striking forces in the modern sense. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, attack helicopters, fighter jets. Ezekiel described a massive mobile military force moving from the north toward Israel. Look at what's being positioned in Syria, southern Turkey, and western Iran right now. Armor, aviation, mobile artillery, rapid deployment forces, staging, positioning, preparing. The Northern Command is forming. And it matches Ezekiel's description with precision that should make every watching believer take notice. But here's the question that leads to the next section. Why? Why would Russia, Turkey, and Iran suddenly converge on Israel? What would motivate 3 rival powers to set aside centuries of competition and move together against a tiny nation on the eastern Mediterranean? Ezekiel answers that question too, and the answer is hiding beneath the waters off Israel's coast. Ezekiel 38:12-13. To take plunder and to take booty, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited, and against a people gathered from the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land. Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and all their young lions will say to you, Have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to take great plunder? The invasion has an economic motivation: plunder, booty, silver and gold, livestock and goods. The coalition comes to take something valuable. For centuries, scholars wondered what Israel could possibly possess that would motivate a massive multinational military operation. Israel was a small nation with limited natural resources, a desert country with more sand than oil. That changed dramatically in the 21st century. In 2009, Noble Energy discovered the Tamar natural gas field off Israel's Mediterranean coast. Estimated reserves: 10 trillion cubic feet. Then in 2010, the Leviathan field was discovered, even larger. Estimated reserves: 22 trillion cubic feet. Together, these discoveries transformed Israel from an energy-importing nation into a potential energy superpower. But that was just the beginning. In 2023, additional surveys revealed even larger reserves beneath the Mediterranean seabed, fields that could contain gas reserves rivaling those of Qatar. Israel is sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of natural gas. And that's not all. The Dead Sea contains approximately 45 billion tons of mineral deposits: potash, bromine, magnesium, salt. These minerals are essential for fertilizer production, pharmaceutical manufacturing, and industrial processes. The value of Dead Sea mineral rights has been estimated at over $1 trillion. Israel's technology sector generates over $50 billion in annual revenue. Its cybersecurity industry is the second largest in the world. Its agricultural technology is exported to dozens of countries. Israel in 2026 is wealthy, prosperous, resource-rich, exactly as Ezekiel described. A people gathered from the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land. A people gathered from the nations. That's the return of the Jewish diaspora, the ingathering that began in the late 19th century and accelerated after 1948, who have acquired goods. That's the economic miracle of modern Israel, a nation built from desert into prosperity in a single century, who dwell in the midst of the land. The Hebrew word translated midst is tabur. It literally means navel or center. Israel occupies the geographic center of the ancient world, the crossroads of 3 continents, and surrounding nations want what Israel has. Russia's economy has been devastated by Western sanctions since 2022. Oil revenues have declined. International trade has been restricted. The ruble has experienced massive volatility. Russia needs new revenue sources. Natural gas reserves off Israel's coast represent exactly that. Iran's economy has been strangled by decades of sanctions. Inflation exceeds 50%. Unemployment among youth is catastrophic. The regime needs an external victory to maintain domestic legitimacy. Turkey's economy has experienced severe currency collapse. The lira has lost over 80% of its value against the dollar since 2018. Erdogan's government faces mounting public anger over economic deterioration. 3 nations, 3 economic crises, 3 motivations to seize resources. And Israel has what all 3 need. Ezekiel saw this 2,500 years ago. Have you come to take plunder? Yes, that's exactly what they're coming for. But notice who responds to the invasion. Ezekiel 38:13. Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and all their young lions will say to you. Sheba and Dedan correspond to modern Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. The merchants of Tarshish likely refer to Western maritime trading nations. Many scholars associate Tarshish with ancient Tartessos in Spain, representing the Western Mediterranean and, by extension, Western Europe. And their young lions? Colonies or nations that emerged from the Western trading powers? Britain? America? The English-speaking world? What do these nations do when the Northern Coalition invades Israel? They protest. They issue diplomatic statements. They say, "Have you come to take plunder?" They don't intervene militarily. And they don't fight. They just talk. Think about that. The Western powers and the Gulf Arab states respond to the invasion of Israel with nothing more than verbal objections. Does that sound familiar? Look at the West in 2026. America is consumed by internal political crisis. Polarization has paralyzed governmental function. Military interventions overseas face overwhelming public opposition. Troop deployments have been reduced across the Middle East. Europe is fractured by economic instability, migration pressures, and energy dependence on the very nations forming the coalition. NATO's cohesion has weakened as Turkey, a member state, increasingly aligns with Russia and Iran rather than Western allies. The Gulf states are hedging their bets. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been diversifying their alliances. It's building relationships with China and Russia while maintaining ties with the West. The traditional protectors of Israel are distracted, divided, and unable to respond effectively. Exactly as Ezekiel described, a verbal protest, nothing more. And Israel stands alone. Or does it? Because Ezekiel describes something else. Something that no military analyst expects. Something that changes everything. But before we get there, you need to understand what's pulling these reluctant nations into the conflict. Because not all of them want to be there. This is one of the most overlooked details in the entire prophecy. Ezekiel 38:4. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and lead you out, with all your army. Hooks in your jaws. God says he will drag this coalition into the invasion. Not invite, not persuade, drag. And the imagery is vivid. A massive beast with hooks in its mouth being pulled against its will toward a destination it would not naturally choose. This implies that the coalition doesn't entirely want to attack Israel. Something compels them. Something forces their hand. Something pulls them into a conflict they might otherwise avoid. Think about what that means geopolitically. Russia doesn't naturally want a direct military confrontation with Israel. Israel has powerful allies, a nuclear arsenal, advanced military technology. The risk-reward calculation doesn't favor a direct assault. Turkey doesn't naturally want to abandon NATO entirely. Its economy depends on Western trade. Its military uses Western equipment. A war against Israel would isolate Turkey from its largest trading partners. Iran doesn't naturally want to trigger a regional war that could result in its own destruction. The regime's primary goal is survival. An invasion of Israel risks overwhelming military response. Yet Ezekiel says they come anyway. Something hooks them. Something drags them. What could that hook be? Several possibilities converge in 2026. First hook, Syria. Russia is already deeply invested in Syria. Its military bases, its political influence, its strategic access to the Mediterranean all depend on maintaining its Syrian foothold. If Israel's ongoing operations in Syria escalate, if Israeli strikes threaten Russian assets, Russia could be drawn into a confrontation it didn't plan. Russian and Israeli forces have already had close encounters in Syrian airspace. Deconfliction protocols have prevented direct conflict so far. But those protocols are fragile. One miscalculation, one downed Russian aircraft, one dead Russian soldier, and the hook sinks deeper. Second hook, Iran's proxy network. Iran has spent decades building a ring of proxy forces around Israel. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria, Hamas in Gaza, Houthis in Yemen. If Israel conducts major operations against these proxies, Iran faces a choice: abandon its proxies and lose regional credibility, or escalate directly and risk everything. Iran cannot afford to lose its proxy network. It represents decades of investment and the foundation of Iran's regional strategy. If that network is threatened, Iran is hooked. Third hook, Turkey and the Palestinian cause. Erdogan has increasingly positioned himself as the champion of Palestinian rights. His rhetoric has become more extreme. His domestic political survival depends partly on this positioning. If events in Jerusalem escalate, if conflict at the Temple Mount intensifies, Erdogan faces domestic pressure to act. not just talk. Act. Turkish troops in northern Syria are already positioned. Turkish naval forces in the eastern Mediterranean are already deployed. The infrastructure for intervention exists. All that's needed is the hook. Fourth hook. Economic desperation. When nations face economic collapse, they historically turn to external conflict. War provides distraction from domestic failures. Conquest provides resources that markets cannot. Russia, Turkey, and Iran are all experiencing severe economic pressure. Natural gas reserves off Israel's coast represent wealth that could rescue failing economies. The economic hook may be the strongest of all. And Ezekiel saw God dragging these nations into battle. The hooks are already set. The jaws are already caught. And the pulling has begun. Ezekiel describes a very specific condition that must exist before the invasion occurs. Ezekiel 38:8. After many days you will be visited. In the latter years you will come into the land of those brought back from the sword, and gathered from many peoples on the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They were brought out of the nations, and now all of them dwell safely. Ezekiel 38:11. You will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. The invasion happens when Israel is dwelling safely, securely, in unwalled villages, without walls, without bars, yet without gates. For decades this seemed impossible. Israel has been in a state of near-constant conflict since its founding. Walls, fences, barriers, and military checkpoints define its borders. How could Israel be described as dwelling safely in unwalled villages? Several possibilities exist. First possibility, the safety is relative. Compared to 2,000 years of diaspora, persecution, and genocide, modern Israel, with its powerful military, represents a level of security the Jewish people haven't experienced in millennia. Second possibility, a future peace agreement could create conditions of perceived security. If a covenant is confirmed with many nations, as Daniel 9:27 describes, Israel might lower its guard. The Abraham Accords, the Saudi normalization process, the broader push for regional stability. If these culminate in a comprehensive peace framework, Israel might genuinely believe it is secure. Third possibility, the unwalled villages may refer to Israel's settlement patterns. Unlike ancient cities with massive defensive walls, modern Israeli communities are open, suburban, spread across the landscape without fortifications. Drive through central Israel and you see exactly this. Open communities, residential neighborhoods, commercial districts, no walls, no gates, no medieval-style fortifications. Modern Israel literally dwells in unwalled villages. And here's what's happening in 2026 that makes this condition increasingly relevant. Traditional peacekeeping forces have been reduced across the region. United Nations observers along the Golan Heights have been compromised since the Syrian civil war. And international monitoring missions have been scaled back. American military presence in the region has decreased. Troop withdrawals from Iraq and Syria have reduced the Western footprint. Aircraft carrier deployments to the Eastern Mediterranean have become less frequent. The security guarantees that Israel has relied on for decades are weakening, and at the same time, Israel's adversaries are strengthening. The gap between Israel's perceived security and its actual vulnerability is widening. This is exactly the condition Ezekiel describes. A nation that believes it is safe, dwelling without walls, unaware of the magnitude of what's approaching from the north. But here's what makes Israel's situation in 2026 particularly significant. Israel's advanced defense systems represent the most sophisticated military technology on Earth. An Iron Dome intercepts short-range rockets. David's Sling handles medium-range threats. Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 intercept ballistic missiles. Iron Beam uses directed energy lasers to destroy incoming projectiles. These systems are extraordinary, but they have limits. Iron Dome's interception rate is approximately 90%, impressive against dozens of rockets, potentially overwhelmed by thousands. Hezbollah alone possesses an estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles. A simultaneous saturation attack from Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and other positions could exceed the capacity of Israel's defense systems. And a coalition army moving overland from the north presents challenges that air defense systems weren't designed to address. Tanks don't fly. Infantry doesn't launch from mobile platforms. A ground invasion requires ground defense. And Israel's ground forces, while elite, are small. The entire Israel Defense Forces number approximately 170,000 active personnel, with 465,000 reservists, against a coalition potentially numbering in the millions. The mathematics are sobering. Israel's technology is remarkable, but against the coalition Ezekiel describes, technology alone may not be sufficient. Which brings us to the most dramatic element of Ezekiel's prophecy. What happens when the coalition actually invades? Because it doesn't end the way the invaders expect. This is where Ezekiel's prophecy moves beyond anything military analysts can model. Because what stops the invasion isn't Israel's military. It's God, directly, personally, catastrophically. Ezekiel 38:18-23. And it will come to pass at the same time, when Gog comes against the land of Israel, and says the Lord God, that my fury will show in my face. For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath I have spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel, so that the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, all creeping things that creep on the earth, and all men who are on the face of the earth, shall shake at my presence. The mountains shall be thrown down, the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. I will call for a sword against Gog throughout all my mountains, says the Lord God. Every man's sword will be against his brother, and I will bring him to judgment with pestilence and bloodshed. I will rain down on him, on his troops, and on the many peoples who are with him, flooding rain, great hailstones, fire, and brimstone. Read that again. God's response to the invasion includes a massive earthquake that shakes the entire land, mountains thrown down, steep places collapsing, confusion among the invading forces so severe that they turn on each other, every man's sword against his brother, pestilence, disease spreading through the ranks, flooding rain, torrential storms, great hailstones, devastating ice, fire and brimstone, supernatural destruction from above. This isn't military defeat. This is divine annihilation. The coalition doesn't lose a battle. It is destroyed by God himself, and the destruction is so complete that the aftermath takes years to process. Ezekiel 39:9-10. Then those who dwell in the cities of Israel will go out and set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and bucklers, the bows and arrows, the javelins and spears. And they will make fires with them for 7 years. They will not take wood from the field, nor cut down any from the forests, because they will make fires with the weapons. 7 years of burning the weapons. The amount of military equipment destroyed is so vast that Israel uses it for fuel for 7 years. Think about what that means in modern terms: tanks, armored vehicles, artillery pieces, aircraft wreckage, ammunition stores, military hardware of every kind, enough material to fuel a nation for 7 years. The scale of the invading force must be enormous for the debris to provide that much material. Ezekiel 39:12. For 7 months, the house of Israel will be burying them in order to cleanse the land. 7 months to bury the dead. Not 7 days, not 7 weeks, 7 months. And the casualties among the invading coalition are so massive that it takes Israel over half a year just to bury the bodies. Professional burial teams are organized, the entire nation participates, and even after 7 months, the process continues. Ezekiel 39:14-15. They will set apart men regularly employed, with the help of a search party, to pass through the land and bury those bodies remaining on the ground, in order to cleanse it. At the end of 7 months, they will make a search. The search party will pass through the land, and when anyone sees a man's bone, he shall set up a marker by it till the buriers have buried it. A systematic search of the entire land. Markers placed by bones. Professional burial teams following behind. This is a cleanup operation of staggering proportions, and the purpose is stated explicitly: to cleanse the land. The contamination from millions of dead soldiers requires a national cleansing effort lasting the better part of a year. Now here's what you need to understand about this divine intervention. God states his purpose clearly. Ezekiel 38:23. Thus I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations. Then they shall know that I am the Lord. Ezekiel 39:7. So I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let them profane my holy name any more. Then the nations shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. The purpose is revelation. God destroys the coalition not just to save Israel, but to reveal himself to the nations, to demonstrate his power, to prove his existence, to vindicate his name. And the nations shall know that I am the Lord. Israel shall know that I am the Lord. The entire world will witness a military invasion destroyed by supernatural forces that no nation on earth could replicate, and every surviving person will know that it was God who did it. This hasn't happened yet, but the coalition that triggers it is forming right now. Here's something most prophecy teachers mention, but rarely explored deeply enough. Look at who is not on Ezekiel's list. Egypt, not mentioned. Jordan, not mentioned. Saudi Arabia, not mentioned. In fact, Saudi Arabia, Sheba, and Dedan is among the nations that protest the invasion, rather than participate. Syria, not mentioned as part of the coalition, despite its geographic proximity and current Russian-Iranian military presence. Iraq, not mentioned. Why? Why are Israel's closest neighbors absent from an invasion force that includes nations much farther away? Several theories exist. Theory 1. Egypt and Jordan have peace treaties with Israel. These agreements, dating to 1979 and 1994 respectively, may persist into the prophetic period. These nations may remain neutral or even sympathetic. Theory 2. These nations may have been neutralized by previous conflicts. If events described in Psalm 83, which describes a war involving Israel's immediate neighbors, occur before Ezekiel 38-39, then those neighbors may no longer have the military capacity to participate. Theory 3. Syria may be effectively controlled by Russia and Iran by the time the invasion occurs. It serves as a staging ground rather than an independent participant. And the absence of these nations is significant because it matches current geopolitical trends. Egypt under Sisi has maintained its peace treaty with Israel and even cooperated on security matters in the Sinai. Jordan under King Abdullah has maintained diplomatic relations with Israel despite public pressure. Saudi Arabia was moving toward normalization with Israel through the Abraham Accords framework before regional tensions paused the process. The nations not on Ezekiel's list are precisely the nations that have shown willingness to coexist with Israel. The nations on the list are precisely the nations that have shown increasing hostility. The alignment is exact. Let me bring everything together. Because the convergence of events in 2026 is unlike anything previous generations witnessed. Russia has expanded its military presence in Syria to record levels. Advanced weapons systems are operational within range of Israeli territory. Turkey has withdrawn from functional cooperation with NATO on Middle Eastern security. Turkish forces are positioned in Syria and the Eastern Mediterranean. Iran has achieved advanced nuclear capability. Its proxy forces surround Israel on multiple fronts. Its alliance with Russia has reached treaty-level cooperation. Sudan has deepened military ties with both Moscow and Tehran. Russian naval facilities operate from Sudanese ports on the Red Sea. Libya remains contested territory with significant Russian and Turkish military presence. The Caucasus region is under increasing Russian control following the elimination of Armenian autonomy in Nagorno-Karabakh. Every nation on Ezekiel's list is aligned, positioned, prepared. Israel has acquired massive natural gas reserves that represent the spoil Ezekiel describes. Western powers are distracted by internal crises and unable to project force effectively in the Middle East. Israel's immediate neighbors are either at peace with Israel or neutralized. Israel dwells in relative security, in unwalled villages, with advanced defense systems but limited ground forces. Every condition Ezekiel describes is present. Every nation he names is positioned. Every motivation he identifies is active. The hooks are set in the jaws. The coalition is forming. The direction is south. And the target is the mountains of Israel. Where does this fit in the broader prophetic sequence? Scholars debate the exact placement of Ezekiel 38 to 39. And some place it before the tribulation, some during, some at the end. But certain clues narrow the possibilities. Ezekiel says Israel is dwelling safely. This could indicate a period after a peace covenant is confirmed. The invasion triggers a revelation of God to the nations. This aligns with early tribulation events that demonstrate divine power. The 7 years of burning weapons matches the 7-year tribulation period described in Daniel 9:27. If the weapons begin burning at the start of the tribulation, the cleanup ends at its conclusion. Israel's recognition of God through this event could correspond to the beginning of spiritual awakening described in other prophetic passages. The timing isn't perfectly clear from Ezekiel alone, but the conditions that precede the invasion are unmistakably present in 2026. And that should matter to everyone watching, because if the Ezekiel invasion is near, then everything that follows it on the prophetic timeline is also near. The tribulation, the abomination of desolation, the time of Jacob's trouble, the return of Christ. All of it accelerates once Ezekiel 38 to 39 is fulfilled. The implications extend far beyond Israel. If a coalition of major military powers invades Israel and is destroyed by supernatural intervention, the entire global order collapses. Russia is destroyed as a military power. The nation that threatened Europe for decades is neutralized on the mountains of Israel. Iran is eliminated as a regional threat. The regime that sought nuclear weapons and regional dominance is crushed by divine judgment. Turkey is devastated. A NATO member destroyed while attacking Israel. With the power vacuum created by the destruction of these three nations, reshapes global politics overnight. Europe loses its primary security threat and its primary energy supplier simultaneously. The Middle East is radically destabilized by the removal of Iranian influence. Central Asia becomes ungovernable without Russian hegemony, and the entire world witnesses supernatural power demonstrated on a battlefield. Nothing will ever be the same. Governments will fall, alliances will dissolve, economic systems will crash, and every person on earth will be forced to confront a question they spent their entire lives avoiding. Is God real? Ezekiel says the answer will be obvious. Then they shall know that I am the Lord. So where does that leave us? Standing at the edge of fulfillment. Russia is positioned. Turkey is aligned. Iran is committed. The coalition is real. The weapons are staged. The hooks are set. And the mountains of Israel are waiting. 2,500 years ago, Ezekiel saw this moment. He described the nations by name. He mapped the invasion route. He predicted the motivation. He detailed the divine response. Everything he wrote is now visible in the headlines. Previous generations read Ezekiel 38 and wondered. This generation reads it and recognizes. The alliance is formed, the direction is set, the target is clear, and the God who made the prophecy is the same God who will fulfill it, on His terms, at His time, in His way. The nations will come from the north. They will come for the spoil. They will come against the mountains of Israel, and they will discover what Pharaoh discovered, what Sennacherib discovered, and what Babylon discovered, what every empire that has ever set itself against God's people has ultimately learned. The God of Israel is not a concept. He is not a tradition. He is not a metaphor. He is the living God, and He keeps His promises, every single one. The coalition is forming. The prophecy is activating. The question is the same one it's always been. Do you know Him? Because the time for casual speculation is over. The Northern Alliance has formed, and what comes next is written in the ancient scrolls with terrifying clarity. The wise shall understand. Do you? Now, before we close, there's something else we need to examine. Because Ezekiel 38 and 39 don't exist in isolation. They sit inside a prophetic framework so interconnected, so interlocking, so precisely engineered, that pulling on one thread causes the entire tapestry to move. And in 2026, every thread is moving simultaneously. That has never happened before. Not in the Crusades, not during the Ottoman collapse, not in 1948, not in 1967, not in 1973. Previous generations saw fragments of alignment, pieces of the puzzle shifting into position. This generation is watching the final pieces drop into place, all at once. Let me walk you through what I mean. Because the Ezekiel invasion doesn't just require a coalition from the north, it requires a convergence of dozens of conditions across multiple prophetic books, multiple geopolitical theaters, and multiple spiritual realities. And every single one of them is active right now. This sounds obvious, but for nearly 1,900 years, it wasn't. From 70 AD, when Rome destroyed the Second Temple and scattered the Jewish people across the earth, until May 14, 1948, there was no nation of Israel, no Jewish sovereignty, no national government, no military, no borders. For 1,878 years, the land Ezekiel described lay desolate, controlled by Romans, Byzantines, Arab caliphates, Crusaders, Mamluks, Ottomans, the British Empire. Every generation of scholars who read Ezekiel 38 during those centuries face the same impossible question. How can an invasion target a nation that doesn't exist? The answer came on a single afternoon in 1948. Israel declared independence, and the nation that had been erased from the map was restored, exactly as Ezekiel described in chapters 36 and 37, before the invasion prophecy even begins. Ezekiel 37 describes the valley of dry bones, dead, scattered, lifeless bones reassembled, flesh restored, breath entering them, a vast army rising from the dead. That is the rebirth of Israel, and it had to happen before chapter 38 could be fulfilled. That condition is met. Condition 2. The Jewish people must be gathered from the nations. Ezekiel 38:8 says the invasion targets those brought back from the sword and gathered from many peoples. Ezekiel 38:12 says the coalition moves against a people gathered from the nations. Not a people who had always been there, a people who were scattered and then regathered. This is the ingathering, the aliyah, the return. From 1882 to the present day, Jewish people have returned to the land of Israel from over 100 countries, from Russia, from Ethiopia, from Iraq, from Yemen, from Poland, from Germany, from Argentina, from America, from France, from every continent on earth. Over 7 million Jewish people now live in the modern state of Israel, gathered from the nations, exactly as Ezekiel described. That condition is met. Condition 3. The land must be restored. Ezekiel 36:34-35. The desolate land shall be tilled instead of lying desolate in the sight of all who pass by. So they will say, "This land that was desolate has become like the Garden of Eden, and the wasted, desolate, and ruined cities are now fortified and inhabited." Mark Twain visited Palestine in 1867 and described it as a desolate country whose soil is rich enough but is given over wholly to weeds. A silent, mournful expanse, a desolation. We never saw a human being on the whole route. That was the land 160 years ago. Today, Israel is one of the most productive agricultural nations on earth. It exports food to Europe. Its drip irrigation technology has been adopted by nations across Africa and Asia. The Negev desert blooms with crops. Forests planted by the Jewish National Fund cover hillsides that were barren for centuries. The desolate land has become like the Garden of Eden. That condition is met. Condition 4. Israel must be prosperous. We covered this earlier with the natural gas reserves and the technology sector. But let me add another dimension. Israel's GDP per capita in 2026 exceeds $55,000. Higher than Britain, higher than France, higher than Japan. A nation the size of New Jersey, with fewer than 10 million people, has become one of the wealthiest nations per capita on Earth. Its stock exchange, its real estate markets, its tech industry, its diamond trade, its pharmaceutical exports, its defense technology sales. Israel has acquired livestock and goods. Ezekiel's language is precise. The invaders come for plunder because there is plunder worth taking. For most of Israel's modern history, the nation survived on foreign aid and agricultural exports. It wasn't wealthy enough to attract a resource war. That has changed entirely. Israel in 2026 is a prize worth fighting for. At least, that's how the coalition sees it, and that condition is met. Condition 5. Israel must dwell securely. We discussed this, the relative security, the unwalled villages, the advanced defense systems creating a sense of invulnerability. But let me add something. The Hebrew word used in Ezekiel 38:8 and 38:11 is betach. It can mean securely, but it can also mean confidently. Israel doesn't necessarily have to be safe. It has to believe it is safe. And in 2026, Israel has every reason for confidence. It has the most advanced military in the Middle East, nuclear weapons, ballistic missile defense, the finest intelligence service on earth. It has peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, normalization agreements with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, an expanding diplomatic network. It has the tacit support of Saudi Arabia on security matters. Israel is confident, but perhaps too confident, because confidence without vigilance is exactly the condition that invites attack. Betach, dwelling confidently. That condition is met. Condition 6. A global communication network must exist. This one is often overlooked. Ezekiel 39:7. So I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let them profane my holy name any more. Then the nations shall know that I am the Lord. The nations shall know, not some nations, not nearby nations, the nations, all of them. For this prophecy to achieve its stated purpose, the destruction of the coalition must be witnessed by the entire world. Every nation must see it. Every people must hear about it. The revelation of God must reach every corner of the earth. How would that happen in the ancient world? It wouldn't. A news traveled by ship and caravan. It took months to cross the Mediterranean, years to reach the Far East. A supernatural event in Israel would have remained a regional story for generations. But in 2026, satellite television, social media, live streaming, 24-hour news cycles, smartphone cameras in the hands of 5 billion people. An event of the magnitude Ezekiel describes would be broadcast to every nation on earth within minutes. The entire world would watch it unfold in real time. The nations would know. Instantly. Universally. Undeniably. For the first time in human history, the communication infrastructure exists to fulfill the stated purpose of the prophecy. That condition is met. Condition 7. The specific coalition must be possible. For most of history, the alliance Ezekiel described was geopolitically impossible. Russia and Turkey fought 12 wars between 1568 and 1918. 12. They were natural enemies for over 4 centuries. Russia and Iran competed for influence in Central Asia and the Caucasus. Persia lost significant territory to Russia in the 19th century. The relationship was defined by hostility. Turkey and Iran represent opposing branches of Islam: Sunni and Shia, Ottoman and Safavid, rivals for regional dominance for 500 years. An alliance of all three was unthinkable until it wasn't. The Syrian civil war changed everything. Russia intervened militarily in 2015. Iran had been involved since the early years of the conflict. Turkey invaded northern Syria in 2016. All three nations had forces operating in the same theater. All three had conflicting objectives. And yet all three found common ground through the Astana process. Astana, the framework through which Russia, Turkey, and Iran coordinate their activities in Syria and the broader region. It began as a conflict management tool. It has evolved into something far more significant: a tripartite strategic alignment, the impossible alliance, formed in our generation, before our eyes. That condition is met. Condition 8. Western power must be in decline. Ezekiel shows the Western nations protesting, but not acting. Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and their young lions issue words but send no armies. For this to happen, Western military dominance must be weakened to the point where intervention is either impossible or politically untenable. Look at the West in 2026. The United States has not won a decisive military conflict since 1991. Afghanistan ended in chaotic withdrawal. Iraq remains unstable decades after invasion. Syria was never resolved. American military recruitment has fallen to historic lows. Equipment stockpiles have been depleted by support for Ukraine. Political polarization makes foreign military commitments nearly impossible to sustain. European militaries have been underfunded for decades. Germany's Bundeswehr lacks basic operational readiness. French forces are stretched thin across Africa. British military strength has declined to levels not seen since the 18th century. NATO's collective defense capability depends on American power projection, and American willingness to project power into the Middle East has been declining steadily. The West talks, but it doesn't act, exactly as Ezekiel described. That condition is met. Condition 9. Nuclear capability must exist, but not be used. Yet this is subtle, but important. Ezekiel describes conventional military forces, armies, troops, weapons, ground forces moving across territory. He does not describe nuclear warfare. The destruction comes from God, not from nuclear weapons. Earthquakes, hailstones, fire and brimstone, pestilence, confusion. For a conventional invasion to occur in the modern age, nuclear weapons must exist but not be deployed. The invaders must believe they can achieve their objectives without triggering nuclear retaliation. How? Possibly through a calculated gamble that Israel won't use nuclear weapons against a massive ground force on its own territory. Nuclear strikes on your own soil create devastation for your own people. Possibly through advanced air defense systems, specifically Russian S-400 and S-500 platforms, that the coalition believes can intercept Israeli ballistic missiles. Possibly through a diplomatic framework that constrains Israel's nuclear option. International pressure, great power guarantees, arms control agreements. The point is that Ezekiel describes a conventional invasion, and for that to happen in a nuclear-armed world, conditions must exist that prevent nuclear escalation. Those conditions are developing. That condition is approaching fulfillment. Condition 10. Spiritual blindness must prevail. This is the condition most people don't discuss. Ezekiel's prophecy describes nations acting with total disregard for divine warning. The coalition marches toward Israel despite the fact that the outcome is written in a book that has been available for 2,500 years. The prophecy is public. But it's been translated into every major language. It's been studied, debated, taught, and broadcast. And yet the nations come anyway. They don't believe it. They don't take it seriously. They dismiss it as myth, allegory, ancient superstition. They march into a trap that has been described in detail for millennia, and they march with confidence. That requires a level of spiritual blindness that is itself prophetic. 2 Peter 3:3-4. Knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, Where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. The last days are characterized by mockery of prophecy, dismissal of divine intervention, assumption that the natural order is unchangeable. That is the prevailing worldview of 2026. Secularism, materialism, naturalism, the assumption that God does not intervene in human affairs, the very mindset that allows nations to march into Ezekiel's trap without hesitation. That condition is met. Now take all 10 conditions together. Israel exists. The people are gathered. The land is restored. The nation is wealthy. The people dwell confidently. Global communication is instant. The coalition is formed. Western power is declining. Nuclear constraints are developing. Spiritual blindness prevails. 10 conditions. All met, simultaneously. For the first time in human history. No previous generation could say this. Not one. The Crusaders couldn't. The Reformers couldn't. The Puritans couldn't. The Victorian prophecy scholars couldn't. Even the generation that witnessed 1948 couldn't. Because in every previous era, multiple conditions remained unfulfilled. The coalition was impossible. Israel didn't exist. The technology wasn't available. The geopolitics weren't aligned. But in 2026, every single condition Ezekiel described is present. Every one. That is not coincidence. That is convergence. And convergence at this scale demands a response. There's a pattern in Scripture that most people miss. Before every major divine intervention, there is silence, stillness, a pause that feels like nothing is happening. Before the flood, Noah built an ark for decades while the world carried on as usual. Before the Exodus, Israel languished in slavery for 400 years, generation after generation. Nothing changed. Until one night, everything changed. There before the walls of Jericho fell, Israel marched in silence for 7 days. No battle cry, no weapons, just footsteps and silence. Before Elijah's fire fell on Mount Carmel, he waited, rebuilt the altar, dug a trench, poured water, waited. Before Jesus was born, there were 400 years of prophetic silence between Malachi and Matthew, 4 centuries with no prophetic word, no angelic visitation, no divine intervention, silence. And then suddenly, without transition, without warning, the silence broke, and everything changed overnight. We may be in that silence now. The pieces are positioned, the conditions are met, the coalition is forming, the hooks are set, but the invasion hasn't begun. Not yet. And in that gap between positioning and fulfillment, in that silence between prophecy written and prophecy completed, the world carries on. Markets open and close. Elections are held. Sports seasons play out. Social media trends cycle through. People eat and drink. They marry and are given in marriage. Life feels normal. But normal is an illusion when every prophetic indicator is flashing. Normal felt normal in Noah's day too, until the rain started. Normal felt normal in Lot's day, until fire fell from heaven. Normal felt normal in Jerusalem in 70 AD, until the Roman legions arrived. The silence before the storm is not evidence that the storm isn't coming. It's the last opportunity to prepare before it arrives. Everything we've examined tonight leads to one inescapable conclusion. Ezekiel's prophecy is not ancient history waiting to be interpreted. It is current events waiting to be fulfilled. The nations are named and positioned. The motivations are active. The conditions are met. The coalition is forming. The target is identified. The divine response is promised. But beneath the geopolitics, beneath the military analysis, beneath the economic motivations and the prophetic timelines, there is a deeper question, a personal question. Because prophecy is never given merely to satisfy curiosity. It is given to provoke decision. Every prophetic word in Scripture has a purpose. And the purpose is never just information, it is transformation. God doesn't reveal the future so that we can be impressed by His knowledge. He reveals the future so that we can respond to His invitation. The same God who told Ezekiel what would happen to the Northern Coalition told Noah what would happen to the ancient world. And then He said, "Ye build an ark." The same God who told Lot what would happen to Sodom said, "Flee to the mountains." The same God who told the disciples what would happen to Jerusalem said, "When you see these things, let those who are in Judea flee." Prophecy is always paired with instruction. Revelation is always paired with invitation. And the invitation right now, in 2026, with every condition met and every sign converging, is the same invitation it has always been. Know Him. Not know about Him. Not know the prophecies. Not know the timelines and the charts and the nation identifications. Know Him. The God who keeps His promises. The God who moves nations like chess pieces. The God who sets hooks in the jaws of empires. The God who sends fire from heaven. The God who defends His people. The God who reveals His name. That God is not distant. How He is not theoretical. He is not waiting for the invasion to begin before He becomes relevant to your life. He is here. Now. In this moment. And the same power that will destroy the Northern Coalition is the same power that is available to every individual who calls on His name. Romans 10:13. For whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Whoever. Not whoever has perfect theology. Not whoever understands every prophetic detail. Not whoever has lived a clean life. Whoever calls. That's the invitation embedded in every prophecy. The storm is coming. The coalition is forming. The hooks are set. The mountains of Israel are waiting. But you don't have to face what's coming without the God who controls what's coming. He's not just the God who fulfills prophecy. He's the God who saves people. And He's extending that offer right now, while the silence holds, while the gap between positioning and fulfillment still exists. While there is still time, the coalition is forming, the prophecy is activating. The conditions have converged. The question is the same one it's always been. Do you know Him? Because the time for casual speculation is over. The Northern Alliance has formed, and what comes next is written in the ancient scrolls with terrifying clarity. The wise shall understand. Do you?